Most villains want something: power, revenge, recognition, control, the return of something lost, the destruction of something hated. Most villains have desires that explain their actions, motivations that make them comprehensible even when they are monstrous. We understand wanting things, even terrible things. We understand the logic of ambition and the logic of rage. We can trace a line from wound to weapon, from loss to destruction, from desire to the actions taken to fulfill it. Most villains, at their core, are just people who want things badly enough to do terrible things to get them. The Lich wants nothing. Not nothing in the sense of wanting the absence of something. Not nothing as a placeholder for some deeper desire. Not nothing as a mask for something else. The Lich wants nothing in the most literal and terrifying sense possible. He wants the cessation of all existence, the end of everything, the return of all things to the void from which they came. His goal is not conquest or domination or even destruction as a means to some other end. His goal is ending, pure and absolute, the extinguishing of every light that has ever burned, the silencing of every voice that has ever spoken, the erasure of every being that has ever existed or could ever exist. This makes him unique among animated villains and rare among villains of any kind. He is not motivated by trauma that could be healed. He is not driven by a wound that could be addressed. He is not pursuing a goal that could be bargained with or redirected. There is no speech that will reach him, no appeal that will move him, no offering that will satisfy him. He cannot be reasoned with because reason requires shared premises, and he shares no premises with the living. He cannot be bargained with because bargaining requires both parties to want something the other can provide, and he wants only what their continued existence prevents, the end of everything. The terror the Lich inspires is different from the terror inspired by other villains. Other villains threaten to take things from you, to hurt you, to change your world in ways you do not want. The Lich threatens to unmake the very context in which having things or being hurt or having a world makes sense. He does not threaten to defeat you, he threatens to make it so that victory and defeat never existed. He does not threaten to kill you, he threatens to make it so that life and death never existed. He threatens to erase the categories themselves, to end the game rather than merely winning it. Adventure Time presents many villains across its long run, villains of varying degrees of threat and complexity and even sympathy. The Ice King is tragic, his villainy the result of damage he did not choose. Flame Princess was antagonistic because of circumstances that she eventually overcame. Magic Man is cruel, but his cruelty has roots in grief that explain, if not excuse it. Even Golb, the embodiment of chaos and discord, is a force of nature rather than a malevolent will. The Lich stands alone in being purely, completely, intentionally evil in a way that admits no mitigation, no explanation, no sympathy. He is what he is, and what he is ending. The question the Lich raises, the question that makes him philosophically interesting as well as narratively terrifying, is whether such a being is even possible, whether wanting nothing in the way he wants nothing is coherent, whether pure negation can serve as a motivation in the way desire usually motivates. He seems to violate the basic logic of action. We act to get things, to achieve states, to bring about outcomes we prefer to alternatives. The Lich acts to end the very possibility of getting or achieving or preferring. His will is directed against the conditions that make willing possible. He is a paradox given form. a being whose existence serves to end existence. The philosophical tradition has names for what the Lich represents, concepts that thinkers have developed to describe to drive toward non-existence, the desire for cessation, the will that wills its own ending. But these concepts usually describe psychological states in beings who also have other states, who sometimes want to end and sometimes want to continue, who struggle between life-affirming and life-negating impulses. The Lich is not like this. He does not struggle. He does not sometimes want life. He is pure negation, without the mixture that characterizes mortal psychology, death drive without life drive, ending without any counterbalancing impulse toward continuation. The effect of the Lich on the show's cosmology is to establish that Adventure Time takes place in a universe where pure evil exists, where some forces are simply opposed to existence and must be simply opposed in return. This is a stronger claim than many contemporary stories are willing to make. Most modern narratives prefer complex villains with understandable motivations, prefer to show that evil emerges from circumstances that might have produced good under different conditions. The Lich refuses this complexity. He is what he is essentially, and not as a result of what happened to him. His evil is not the product of his history, but the content of his nature. The existence of such a being raises questions about the nature of the universe that contains him. If the Lich exists, then pure evil is possible. If pure evil is possible, then the universe is not ultimately benign, not structured in ways that guarantee the triumph of good, not moving toward redemption or reconciliation. The Lich's presence makes Adventure Time's universe darker than it would otherwise be, introduces a note of genuine cosmic horror into a show that is usually warm and hopeful. He is the darkness that the warmth must define itself against, the horror that the hope must persist despite. The children who watch Adventure Time encounter in the Lich something they may not encounter elsewhere in children's media, a villain who is simply evil, who cannot be befriended or redeemed or understood into harmlessness. This is a gift in a strange way. The world contains things that are simply bad, forces that are simply opposed to flourishing, threats that must be fought rather than negotiated with. The Lich teaches this lesson in a form that is fictional and therefore safe, that allows children to encounter absolute evil without being harmed by it, that prepares them for a world that contains genuine malevolence alongside the complexity they are also learning to recognize. The adults who watch Adventure Time recognize in the Lich something older and more familiar. The face of annihilation that has haunted human consciousness since we became capable of imagining our own extinction. He is the bomb, the plague, the asteroid, the climate catastrophe, every force that threatens to end not just individual lives, but life itself. He gives form to fears that are otherwise too large to grasp, makes visible the invisible threat that shadows all human achievement. In doing so, he allows those fears to be faced, to be named, to be opposed, rather than simply endured. The Lich's name itself carries weight and history, connecting him to traditions of horror and evil that precede Adventure Time by centuries. A Lich, in fantasy tradition, is an undead sorcerer who has sacrificed humanity for power, who persists past death through dark magic, who represents the corruption of knowledge into domination. Adventure Time's Lich draws on these associations, while exceeding them, taking the concept of the Lich and elevating it to cosmic scale, transforming a fantasy monster into a philosophical proposition about the nature of evil itself. The simplicity of calling him the Lich rather than giving him a personal name, reinforces his status as something other than a person. He is not a being with a name, but a category given singular form, not someone, but something, not an individual, but an instance of a type that happens to have only one member. This naming choice is subtle but significant, maintaining distance, preventing identification, refusing the humanization that a personal name might allow. The first appearance of the Lich establishes immediately that something different has arrived, that the show's usual tone of adventure and comedy has been suspended for something darker and more serious than anything that has come before. The episode treats his presence with a gravity the show rarely employs, a sense that the stakes have genuinely changed, that the threat is not one that can be handled with the usual combination of courage and improvisation that Finn brings to his adventures. The Lich is introduced as a problem of a different order, a challenge that exceeds the parameters the show has established. The visual design of the Lich communicates his nature before he speaks a word. He is skeletal, decayed, a figure of death given animation and purpose. His eyes burn with green fire that suggests not life, but its negation, not energy, but entropy given visible form. He wears the remnants of what might once have been royal garb, suggesting fallen grandeur, corrupted authority, power turned entirely to destruction. Every element of his appearance says that he is something that should not exist, something that persists past the point where persistence should be possible, something that has refused to end so that he can end everything else. The way other characters react to the Lich reinforces his exceptional status. Billy, the greatest hero Oo has ever known, defines his own heroism partly through his confrontation with the Lich. The fact that Billy could not destroy the Lich, but only imprison him, establishes that the Lich exceeds what even the greatest hero can handle. The Lich is the threat that makes all other threats seem manageable, the darkness against which all other darknesses are measured. His existence defines the upper limit of what evil can be in the world of Adventure Time. The show's decision to treat the Lich seriously, to not undercut his menace with humour or reveal hidden depths that make him sympathetic, is a choice that gives him power other villains lack. Adventure Time is a show that finds humanity in almost everyone, that reveals complexity beneath apparent simplicity, that suggests most antagonists are wounded rather than wicked. The refusal to extend this treatment to the Lich is itself significant. Some things, the show suggests, are simply evil, simply threats, simply to be opposed rather than understood. The Lich is Adventure Time's acknowledgement that pure evil exists, that not everything can be redeemed or reasoned with, that some darknesses have no hidden light. The recurring nature of the Lich, his refusal to stay defeated, his return in different forms and through different means, establishes him as a fundamental feature of the show's reality, rather than a problem that can be solved once and forgotten. You cannot kill the Lich in any permanent sense, because the Lich is not merely a being, but a principle, not merely a character, but a force. He represents something that exists as long as existence exists, the possibility of its ending, the shadow that accompanies every light, the death that waits within every life. Defeating him is always temporary, because what he represents is permanent. The show's treatment of the Lich across multiple seasons allows his menace to develop and deepen rather than diminishing through familiarity. Each return reveals new dimensions of his threat, new implications of his existence. new ways in which his particular kind of evil manifests. He possesses Billy, wears the greatest hero as a disguise, corrupts the very symbol of hope. He seeks the power to end all dimensions, not just one world but every world, not just one timeline but every timeline. His ambition scales with each appearance until it encompasses literally everything that exists or could exist. The pacing of the Lich's appearances throughout the series is itself meaningful. He does not appear every episode or even every season. He arrives at moments when the show is ready to escalate, when the stakes need to be raised, when the characters need to face something that exceeds ordinary adventure. His appearances mark turning points, transitions between phases of the show's development, moments when Adventure Time acknowledges that it is capable of being something other than light-hearted comedy. The Lich is the show's way of demonstrating its range, of proving that it can do genuine horror and genuine stakes alongside its usual warmth. The world of Ooh continues between the Lich's appearances. Life goes on, characters have adventures and relationships and growth. But the Lich's existence shadows all of this, reminds attentive viewers that this bright world exists in the shadow of something that wants to end it, that every joy is temporary, not just in the way all joys are temporary, but in the specific way that something actively works toward the cessation of all joy. The Lich is not just a villain who might return. He is a fact about reality that must be reckoned with, even when he is not present. The question of whether the Lich can ever truly be defeated, whether the show will eventually have to provide some final victory over him, creates narrative tension that extends beyond any individual episode. Viewers know that ordinary defeats are not permanent, that he has come back before and could come back again. This knowledge changes how we watch his defeats, prevents us from fully relaxing into victory, maintains a current of anxiety beneath even triumphant moments. The Lich's persistence is not just a plot device, but an existential statement. Some threats cannot be eliminated, only managed. The episodes that feature the Lich are among the most memorable in the series, not just because of his menace, but because of what his presence does to the show around him. The comedy recedes. The animation takes on darker tones. The music shifts to something more ominous. Everything in the show responds to his presence, changes to accommodate the seriousness he brings. These episodes feel different from other episodes, feel like Adventure Time is showing us something it usually keeps hidden, revealing depths that its cheerful surface usually conceals. The build-up to Lich episodes, the anticipation that accompanies their announcement, demonstrates the unique place he holds in the show's mythology. Other villains come and go, without much fanfare. The Lich's returns are events, moments when the show signals that something important is about to happen, that the stakes are about to escalate, that viewers should pay attention because what follows will matter. This event status is earned through his previous appearances, through the memory of what he has been, through the knowledge that his presence always signifies something significant. The legacy of the Lich in Adventure Time extends beyond his individual appearances to influence how the show treats threat and menace generally. Other villains are measured against him, consciously or not. The show knows what genuine danger looks like because the Lich has established it, knows what pure evil sounds like because his voice has defined it. His existence raises the bar for all other antagonists, creates a standard that lesser threats cannot meet, ensures that viewers always know the difference between ordinary trouble and true danger. The influence of the Lich on animation, more broadly, is harder to trace but worth acknowledging. He demonstrates that children's animation can include genuine horror, that young audiences can handle villains who are simply evil, that darkness has a place in entertainment that also contains light. Shows that followed Adventure Time had his example to draw on, had proof that such characters could work, had permission to include similar darkness in their own stories. The fandom's relationship to the Lich, the way fans discuss and analyse and remember him, reflects his unique status. He is not a character fans relate to or identify with in the way they might relate to other villains. He is a character fans fear and respect, a presence they acknowledge as genuinely threatening, a creation they recognise as something special. The conversations about him are different from conversations about other characters, more serious, more philosophical, more focused on what he means rather than what he does. The voice of the Lich, provided by Ron Perlman, is one of the most effective pieces of vocal casting in animation history. It is deep and resonant, carrying weight and authority, but also hollow, as if echoing up from somewhere that should not produce sound. There is no warmth in it, no variation that suggests emotion or reaction, no quality that indicates the presence of a mind that could be reached or a heart that could be moved. It is the voice of pronouncement rather than conversation, declaration rather than dialogue, ending rather than exchange. When the Lich speaks, he does not argue or persuade or threaten in the way other villains threaten. He states. He describes what will happen with the certainty of someone describing what has already occurred. His words are not attempts to achieve effects, but reports of facts that happen to be terrible. This mode of speech removes him from the ordinary dynamics of conflict, where threats are meant to intimidate and speeches are meant to convince. The Lich is not trying to intimidate anyone, because intimidation serves purposes and he has no purposes beyond ending. He speaks as a witness to inevitability, not as an agent trying to bring something about. The specific words the Lich uses, when he speaks at all, are chosen with care that suggests intelligence and purpose behind his pure negation. He understands the living well enough to describe their condition with terrible accuracy. He knows what they value well enough to dismiss it completely. His intelligence is not in doubt. What is in doubt is whether anything like consciousness, as we understand it, exists behind that intelligence, whether there is any experience of being the Lich, or only the function of ending without anyone home to experience the ending. The rarity of the Lich's speech makes each instance more powerful, each word more weighted, each pronouncement more significant. He is not a villain who monologues because he enjoys hearing himself talk, or because he wants his victims to understand his genius. He speaks only when speech serves his purpose, and his purpose is served mostly by action rather than words. The silence that surrounds his rare speeches is itself meaningful, a silence that suggests the void he wishes to impose on everything, the absence that is his true communication. The contrast between the Lich's voice and the voices of other characters in Adventure Time heightens his alienness, his fundamental difference from everything else in the show. Other characters, even other villains, speak with inflection and emotion and variety. Their voices reveal their inner states, communicate their desires, connect them to the world of living beings who want things and feel things. The Lich's voice reveals nothing because there is nothing to reveal, communicates nothing, but the fact of his existence connects to nothing, because connection is part of what he wishes to end. The physicality of Perlman's performance, the way he grounds the Lich's cosmic evil in a voice that is recognizably produced by a body, creates an uncanny effect that pure abstraction would not achieve. The Lich is not merely a concept, but a presence, not merely an idea, but a being who exists in the same world as the characters we love, who could speak to them, who could be in the same room with them. This presence makes him more frightening than a purely abstract threat would be. He is close enough to touch, real enough to speak, present enough to be feared in the way we fear things that could actually harm us. The memory of the Lich's voice lingers after his appearances end, haunts the show even when he is not present, creates a standard of menace against which other threats are measured. Characters who have heard him speak carry that hearing with them, are changed by having been addressed by something that wants only their end. The audience carries it too, remembers the particular quality of that voice, the specific way it made them feel, the darkness it introduced into a show that is usually so full of light. The craft of Perlman's performance deserves attention because it accomplishes something difficult, making emptiness audible, giving voice to void, performing the absence of everything that usually makes a voice human. Lesser performers might have gone larger, might have made the Lich bombastic or theatrical. Perlman goes smaller in a sense, strips away everything except weight and authority, creates a voice that is frightening precisely because it does not try to frighten, that threatens not through aggression, but through simple statement of terrible fact. The writing that accompanies the Lich's voice is equally sparse and equally effective. He is not given monologues full of backstory or explanations of his motivations. He speaks in short declarations, in statements that do not invite response, in words that function more like inscriptions than like speech. This restraint gives his rare words more impact, makes each sentence land with the weight of pronouncement rather than the flow of conversation. The Lich does not talk, he utters, he pronounces, he declares. The silence that surrounds the Lich's words, the absence of the usual soundtrack and sound effects when he speaks, creates a pocket of stillness that amplifies everything he says. The show literally quiets itself when he appears, as if even the ambient world is holding its breath in his presence. This technical choice reinforces his exceptional status, marks his scenes as different from all other scenes, uses the language of sound design to communicate what his character means to the show's reality. The contrast with Finn's voice is particularly striking. Finn is all life and energy and forward motion, his voice rising and falling with emotion, expressing every feeling openly, communicating engagement with the world. The Lich's voice is none of these things, exists in the same acoustic space as Finn's voice, but occupies it completely differently. When they speak to each other, the clash of these vocal qualities is itself dramatic. Two fundamentally different modes of being in the world, made audible through two fundamentally different ways of speaking. The evolution of how the Lich's voice is used across the series shows increasing sophistication in deploying this unique instrument. Early appearances use his voice for direct threat and menace. Later appearances find subtler applications. The voice emerging from Billy's familiar face, the voice speaking truths that are terrible precisely because they are true, the voice offering not threats, but observations about the nature of existence. Perlman's performance accommodates all of these uses, remains recognizably the same voice while serving different dramatic functions. The iconic status of the Lich's voice in animation history is well deserved and increasingly recognized. Lists of great voice performances inevitably include Perlman's work, not because he had more lines or more screen time than other performers, but because what he accomplished with limited material was so distinctive and so effective. He created a voice that audiences remember, that haunts them, that stays with them long after the episode's end. This is the measure of great voice work, not volume but impact, not quantity but quality of impression. The lessons other voice actors might draw from Perlman's work include the power of restraint, the effectiveness of stillness, the impact of economy. He does not try to do too much, does not reach for effects that would undermine the character's fundamental simplicity. The Lich is pure in a way that lesser performances would have complicated, singular in a way that more would have diluted. Perlman understood that sometimes less is more, that the most frightening thing is not the voice that does everything, but the voice that does one thing with absolute conviction. The sound design that surrounds the Lich's voice, the way the show builds an acoustic world for him to inhabit, deserves recognition alongside the voice itself. The silence, the low drones, the absence of the usual bright sounds, all work together to create an environment in which his voice can land with maximum impact. This is collaborative art, the voice working with every other element of sound to create something that none of them could achieve alone. The origin of the Lich in the Mushroom War connects him to the deepest history of Adventure Time's world, to the catastrophe that created Ooh, to the destruction that preceded the strange and wonderful world the show depicts. He emerged from the bomb that ended human civilization, from the moment of greatest destruction in the show's mythology, from the event that killed almost everything and transformed what survived. He is not merely a villain who appeared at some point. He is the direct product of humanity's greatest failure, the embodiment of extinction that humanity nearly achieved. This origin gives the Lich a weight that invented villains lack. He is not arbitrary, not a threat that could have been otherwise, not a problem that exists simply because stories need antagonists. He is the necessary consequence of what happened, the inevitable result of what humanity did, the shadow that the Mushroom War cast across all subsequent history. Every scene in Adventure Time takes place in a world that exists because almost everything was destroyed, and the Lich is that destruction given form and will, walking through the world that survived him, seeking to finish what the bomb started. The Mushroom War itself is one of Adventure Time's most powerful pieces of world building, a background mythology that explains everything strange about Ooh, while also serving as commentary on real human capacity for self-destruction. The war was not alien invasion or natural disaster or cosmic accident. It was human beings destroying themselves with weapons they built, using intelligence for extinction, turning their greatest capabilities toward their own ending. The Lich inherits this human origin, while transcending it, becomes something more than human while remaining a product of human failure. The radiation and mutation that the war produced, that created the candy people and the talking animals and the magical beings that populate Ooh, also created the Lich, or perhaps released him. He is cousin to all the strange creatures of Adventure Time in the sense that they share an origin in catastrophe, but he is their opposite in what he wants from his continued existence. They want to live, to build, to connect, to create meaning from the ruins of the old world. He wants to complete the destruction, to finish the ending, to ensure that the survival that produced Ooh is revealed as temporary reprieve rather than genuine continuation. The green fire that is associated with the Lich, that burns in his eyes and surrounds his power, visually connects him to the radiation of the bomb, to the poison that the war released into the world, to the death that continues to emanate from the destruction that created him. Green is the colour of corruption in Adventure Time, of power that destroys rather than creates, of energy that contaminates rather than enlivens. The Lich carries this colour with him wherever he goes, marks whatever he touches with the sign of the ending he represents, visually reminds us that he is the bomb's continuation, the war's ambassador, the destruction that refuses to stay in the past, the well of power that sustains the Lich, the source of his continued existence and his terrible abilities, is itself a remnant of the war, a place where the destructive force concentrated and persisted, a wound in reality that never healed. This well connects him to the land itself, makes him a feature of U's geography, as well as its history, ensures that he cannot be simply removed or expelled, but must be dealt with as part of what the world is. The Lich is not an invader, but a native, not an external threat, but an internal one, not a problem that came from elsewhere, but a problem that grew from the same soil that produced everything else. The tragic implication of the Lich's origin is that he exists because of something recognizably human, something that viewers cannot entirely distance themselves from. We built bombs. We created the capacity for extinction. We contain whatever it is in us that the Lich represents in pure form. He is not alien, but terribly familiar, not incomprehensible, but all too comprehensible to anyone who has looked honestly at what human beings are capable of. The Lich is us, in a sense, or at least the part of us that could end everything, given form and separated from everything else we are. The specific bomb that created the Lich, glimpsed in flashbacks and references throughout the series, resembles real nuclear weapons in ways that ground the fantasy in historical reality. The Mushroom War is not a purely fictional catastrophe, but a version of catastrophes that nearly happened and could still happen, an exaggeration of real human capacity for self-destruction that is not so exaggerated as to be unrecognizable. The Lich emerged from this real-world referent, carries with him associations that connect Adventure Time's fantasy to the actual history of human violence. The relationship between the Lich and the Mushroom War raises questions about causation that the show leaves deliberately ambiguous. Did the bomb create the Lich, or did the Lich somehow cause the bomb, reaching back through time to engineer his own origin? Is he the product of human destruction, or its true agent, the result of what we did, or the reason we did it? This ambiguity deepens his menace by suggesting that his relationship to human history might be more fundamental than a simple origin story would imply. The other beings created by the Mushroom War, the inhabitants of U, who are his fellow products of catastrophe, relate to him as life relates to death, as creation relates to destruction, as the impulse to continue relates to the impulse to end. They are siblings, in a sense, born of the same event, shaped by the same forces. But where they represent survival and adaptation, and the persistence of life through transformation, he represents the opposite, the refusal of survival, the rejection of adaptation, the insistence that the destruction should have been complete. The fact that life returned after the Mushroom War, that U exists at all, is itself a rebuke to what the Lich represents. The world said no to ending, said yes to continuation, rebuilt itself from ruins in forms that are strange but viable. The Lich exists in a world that has already proven that ending is not inevitable, that survival is possible, that life finds ways. His project is already partially failed by the time we meet him, already contradicted by the existence of everything around him. This does not make him less dangerous, but gives the resistance to him a foundation. We know life can persist because it already has. The tension between the Lich's origin in human destruction and his current status as something beyond human creates productive ambiguity about what he finally is. Is he the consequence of human sin, the punishment we brought upon ourselves? Or is he something that merely used human destruction as a doorway into existence, something that would have found another way in, regardless? The show permits both readings, allows the Lich to be both human product and cosmic force, both our fault and something larger than fault, both historically grounded and metaphysically significant. The environmental reading of the Lich, which sees him as representing the destruction humans are inflicting on the natural world, gains support from his origin, but is not limited by it. He is the bomb, but he is also the extinction event we are currently causing, the collapse we are building, the ending we are choosing, through accumulated small decisions that add up to catastrophe. Reading him this way makes him more relevant, more urgent, more present than a purely historical interpretation would allow. He is not just what we did, he is what we are doing. The question of whether the Lich knows he came from human destruction, whether he has any awareness of his origin or any relationship to it, is one the show leaves open. He does not seem nostalgic for the war that created him, does not seem to identify with humanity in any way, does not seem to care about his own history. This indifference to origin reinforces his purity of purpose. He does not want to finish what humans started as a way of honouring that start. He simply wants to end everything, and the fact that humans began the process is incidental to his continued project. The visual connections between the Lich and images of nuclear destruction, the green fire that recalls radiation, the skeletal form that recalls the shadows left by atomic blasts, ground his fantasy in documentary images that many viewers will recognize. These connections are not accidental but carefully designed, choices that link Adventure Time's mythology to real history, that ensure the Lich carries associations that exceed his fictional context. He is not merely a cartoon villain, but a symbol with real-world reference that deepen his meaning. The speech the Lich delivers to Finn in the episode Mortal Recoil, and expanded in later appearances, constitutes one of the most memorable monologues in animation history. A statement of pure nihilism delivered with such conviction and such poetry that it achieves a kind of terrible beauty. The words themselves are carefully chosen, each one weighted with meaning, each phrase building toward a vision of existence as temporary and ultimately futile against the forces that will eventually end it. The speech does not threaten so much as describe, does not argue so much as reveal, does not persuade so much as pronounce what the Lich believes to be simply true. The content of the speech addresses the nature of life itself, its smallness against the vastness of time and space, its fragility against the forces that will eventually extinguish it, its futility against the ending that awaits all things. The Lich speaks of stars going dark, of worlds ending, of the inevitability of cessation that no effort can finally prevent. He speaks not with glee, but with something like patience, the patience of someone who knows what is coming, and simply waits for the living to understand what he already understands. His speech is education as much as threat, a lesson in cosmology that happens to be delivered by its darkest implication. The effect of this speech on Finn, on viewers, on the show itself, is to introduce a perspective that the show usually avoids, a cosmic pessimism that sees all striving as ultimately pointless, all achievement as ultimately erased, all meaning as ultimately dissolved into the void that preceded existence and will follow it. This perspective is not refuted so much as opposed, not argued against so much as fought against. The show does not pretend that the Lich is wrong in any simple sense. It insists that his being right, if he is right, does not make resistance futile, does not make meaning impossible, does not make life not worth living. The poetry of the Lich's speech, its rhythm and imagery and dark beauty, raises questions about whether evil can be aesthetically compelling without being morally endorsed. The speech is well written in ways that make it memorable, quotable, impactful. It achieves effects that good writing achieves. Does this aesthetic success compromise its status as expression of evil? Or does it demonstrate that evil can be articulated with skill without becoming less evil? The show seems to suggest the latter. The Lich's eloquence makes him more frightening, not less, shows that darkness can speak beautifully without becoming light. The specific images the Lich employs, the falling stars and dying worlds and endless void, draw on traditions of cosmic horror that precede Adventure Time by a century. Traditions that find terror not in monsters or ghosts, but in the sheer scale of the universe and the insignificance of human concerns within it. The Lich speaks the language of this tradition, translates it for a younger audience, introduces children to the vertigo of cosmic perspective that adult horror has long explored. He is Adventure Time's ambassador from the literature of cosmic dread. The silence that follows the Lich's speech, the moment when his words hang in the air before action resumes, is dramatically crucial. The show allows the speech to land, gives viewers time to absorb what has been said, does not rush past the darkness to get back to the light. This patience with difficult material is characteristic of Adventure Time's willingness to take seriously things that children's shows often avoid. The Lich's speech is not interrupted or undercut or immediately refuted. It is heard fully, and then the story continues in full awareness of what has been said. The way characters respond to the Lich's speech, when they respond at all, tends toward action rather than argument. They do not debate his cosmology or offer counter-arguments to his nihilism. They fight him. They resist him. They oppose his project without claiming to have refuted his philosophy. This response is itself a statement. Some things are to be fought rather than argued with. Some positions are to be opposed rather than engaged. Some speeches are to be survived rather than answered. The Lich's eloquence does not entitle him to dialogue. The quotability of the Lich's speech, its circulation among fans, its status as one of the most referenced moments in the series, demonstrates the power of giving evil a voice that is genuinely compelling. People remember what he said, because what he said was said well, was crafted with care, was written by writers who understood that the villain's words needed to be worthy of the threat he represented. Lesser writing would have made him less frightening. The excellence of his speech makes him more so. The context in which the speech is delivered, the specific narrative moment when these words are spoken, matters for their impact. The Lich does not speechify randomly, but speaks at moments of confrontation, moments when his words can have maximum effect, moments when his cosmic perspective can crush the hope that the heroes are trying to maintain. The timing is predatory, designed to wound, aimed at the place where resistance is weakest. The legacy of the Lich's speech in animation includes its influence on how other shows approach villain monologues, its demonstration that children's entertainment can include sophisticated philosophical content, its proof that young audiences can engage with complex ideas about existence and meaning. Writers who came after had this example to learn from, this standard to aspire to, this proof that ambition in children's writing could succeed. The translation of the speech into different languages for international audiences presented challenges that illuminate what makes it work in English. The specific rhythms, the particular word choices, the cadence that gives the speech its power required careful adaptation to preserve in other linguistic contexts. The fact that the speech remains effective across languages suggests that its power comes from more than just the specific English words, from the ideas and images themselves, rather than merely their expression. The placement of the speech within the episode, its position in the narrative arc, its relationship to what comes before and after, shows sophisticated understanding of dramatic structure. The speech is not delivered at the beginning, where it would set tone, or at the end, where it might serve as conclusion. It arrives at a moment of maximum dramatic tension, amplifies that tension rather than resolving it, leaves characters and viewers alike shaken by what has been said while the story still demands response. The response the speech has generated among fans, the analysis and discussion it has prompted, the way it has become a touchstone for conversations about the show's philosophical depth, demonstrates that it succeeded in what it attempted. The speech wanted to haunt, and it haunts. It wanted to be remembered, and it is remembered. It wanted to establish the Lich as something more than an ordinary villain, and it achieved that establishment definitively. The longevity of the speech's impact, its continued relevance, years after it first aired, suggests that it tapped into something enduring about human experience. Fashions change, references become dated, but genuine engagement with fundamental questions remains powerful. The Lich's speech engages with the most fundamental questions, asks about the meaning of existence itself, and this engagement keeps it fresh regardless of when it is encountered. The speech stands as evidence of what children's animation can achieve when it takes its audience seriously, when it assumes that viewers can handle difficult ideas and dark themes. Too often, entertainment for young people is sanitized beyond recognition, stripped of anything that might challenge or disturb. The Lich's speech represents the opposite approach, trusting that young audiences deserve and can handle genuine philosophical weight. The question of what the Lich actually wants, examined carefully, reveals something stranger and more philosophically interesting than simple destruction. He does not want to rule over ashes. He does not want to be the last thing standing. He does not want the satisfaction of having won. He wants ending itself, wants the cessation of all existence, including, presumably, his own, wants a state in which there is nothing left to want anything. His desire is self-consuming in the most literal sense. Its fulfillment would include the ending of the one who desires it. This self-consuming quality of the Lich's desire raises questions about whether it is coherent, whether wanting your own non-existence is possible in the way wanting other things is possible. Philosophers have debated whether death can be bad for the one who dies, whether non-existence can be the object of rational preference, whether the drive towards self-annihilation makes sense given that there will be no self left to enjoy or experience the annihilation. The Lich seems to want something that may not be wantable in any ordinary sense, to pursue a goal that would eliminate the pursuer, to work toward an outcome that would make all work retroactively meaningless. The show does not resolve these philosophical puzzles, but lets them exist as part of what makes the Lich strange and frightening. He may be impossible in some deep sense, a being whose existence contradicts the nature of his desire, a paradox that walks and speaks and threatens. This impossibility does not make him less real within the story, but more mysterious, more alien, more fundamentally other than beings whose desires can be understood through ordinary psychology. He exceeds our categories, and the excess is part of his horror. The comparison between the Lich's desire for nothing and ordinary desires for things illuminates what is strange about him by contrast. Ordinary desires make sense. You want something, you pursue it, you get it, or you do not, and in either case, the structure of wanting and pursuing is comprehensible. The Lich's desire inverts this structure. He wants nothing, pursues the absence of everything, seeks a state in which seeking and wanting and pursuing would be impossible. He is running toward a finish line that would erase the race, the runner, and the concept of finishing. The question of whether the Lich experiences anything like satisfaction or pleasure in pursuing his goal, whether he enjoys his work or merely performs it, whether there is any subjective quality to his existence or only function without experience, is one the show leaves carefully ambiguous. He does not seem to enjoy destruction in the way that some villains enjoy it. He does not seem frustrated by his failures in the way that some villains are frustrated. He simply continues, persists, pursues, without emotional colouring that would make him more comprehensible. His inner life, if he has one, is inaccessible. The theological implications of a being like the Lich existing are worth considering. If the universe contains a being who purely wants non-existence, what does that say about the nature of reality? Is the Lich a flaw in creation, a mistake that should not exist? Is he a necessary shadow, the darkness that defines light by contrast? Is he evidence that the universe is not ultimately good, that the forces of destruction are as fundamental as the forces of creation? Adventure Time does not answer these questions, but raises them through his existence. The contrast between the Lich and characters who want life, who fight for existence, who build and create and connect, gives the show its fundamental moral structure. The Lich is what they are not, the negation against which their affirmation defines itself. Without him, or someone like him, their striving would have no opposite. Their love of life would have no enemy. Their choice to continue would have no alternative. He makes their heroism meaningful by providing something genuinely worth opposing. The motivation structure of ordinary beings, including ordinary villains, involves wanting states of affairs that would satisfy them, pursuing goals whose achievement would feel like success. The Lich inverts this structure completely. His success would not satisfy him, because satisfaction requires a self to be satisfied, and his success would eliminate all selves, including his own. He pursues a goal whose achievement would make achievement impossible, whose completion would complete nothing, because there would be nothing left to complete. This is not ordinary motivation, but its negation. The question of whether the Lich could ever stop, whether he could be persuaded to cease his project, whether there is any circumstance under which he would not pursue ending, seems to have a clear answer: no. He does not pursue ending because of circumstances that could be changed or reasons that could be addressed. He pursues ending because pursuing ending is what he is, because his identity is constituted by his goal, because stopping would not be him stopping, but him ceasing to exist as himself. To ask him to stop is to ask him to die in the sense that matters. The comparison between the Lich and suicidal ideation, while sensitive, is illuminating. People who want to die still want things other than death, still have parts of themselves that resist non-existence, still experience the drive toward ending as one drive among others rather than as their entire identity. The Lich has no such internal conflict. He is pure drive toward ending without any counterbalancing drive toward continuation. He is what suicidal ideation would look like if it consumed everything else, leaving only the wish for cessation. The philosophical literature on the desire for non-existence, which ranges from Schopenhauer's pessimism to contemporary discussions of antinatalism, provides context for understanding what the Lich represents. He is an extreme case of a position that has been seriously argued, a literalization of philosophical claims about the disvalue of existence. Understanding him requires engaging with ideas that are uncomfortable, but not absurd, that have been defended by thinkers who were not themselves evil. The show's implicit response to the Lich's philosophical position is not argument, but affirmation, not refutation, but celebration. The existence of Finn and Jake, and all the colourful characters of Ooh, is itself the answer to the Lich, the demonstration that existence can be good, that life can be worth living, that what exists has value that justifies its continuation. The show does not tell us the Lich is wrong. It shows us that his being right would not make life not worth fighting for. The question of whether the Lich represents a position the show takes seriously, or a position it uses as foil for its affirmation of life, has no simple answer. Both seem true. The show takes the Lich seriously enough to make him genuinely frightening, to give him speeches worth remembering, to treat his threat as real rather than merely apparent. But it also uses him to clarify what the show values, to define by negation what it affirms, to give viewers something to root against that makes rooting for the heroes more meaningful. The Lich as thought experiment, as a being who tests what we believe about existence and value, serves a philosophical function beyond his narrative function. Thinking about him forces us to think about why we prefer existence to non-existence, why we value continuation over cessation, why we fight against ending rather than accepting it. He is useful for clarifying our own commitments, even as he threatens them, helpful for understanding what we believe by showing us what its opposite would look like. The education the Lich inadvertently provides, the philosophical sophistication he requires viewers to develop in order to understand him fully, makes him valuable beyond his role as antagonist. Viewers who engage seriously with what he represents come away with clearer thinking about existence, value, meaning, and the nature of evil. He is a teacher through negation, illuminating what matters by threatening it. The entity known as Sweet Pea, the childlike being who contains the Lich, represents one of the show's most complex and hopeful statements about the nature of evil and the possibility of transformation. The Lich was not destroyed but reborn, not eliminated but contained within a form that is innocent and good, not ended but transformed into something that seems to be its opposite. Sweet Pea is gentle where the Lich was merciless, loving where the Lich was destructive, full of life where the Lich was full of death. The transformation seems complete, seems like redemption achieved. But the Lich remains within Sweet Pea, dormant but present, a potential that could reactivate, a darkness that has been suppressed rather than eliminated. Episodes that focus on Sweet Pea carry this tension, this awareness that the most dangerous being in the show's mythology exists within this innocent child, that his gentleness coexists with the capacity for universal destruction. The dramatic irony is exquisite. We know what Sweet Pea does not know about himself, fear what he cannot fear, see the shadow that he cannot see. The question of whether Sweet Pea is the Lich reformed or the Lich imprisoned is one the show explores without definitively answering. If Sweet Pea is the Lich transformed, then redemption is possible even for pure evil, even for the being who wanted only ending. If Sweet Pea is merely the Lich's prison, then the evil persists unchanged beneath the innocent surface, waiting for its chance to emerge. The difference matters enormously for what the show is saying about the nature of evil and the possibility of change. The relationship between Sweet Pea and the citizens of Ooh, particularly Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig, who adopt him, creates poignant, dramatic tension. They love him genuinely, see him as their child, want only his happiness and well-being. They are raising the potential destroyer of everything, nurturing the being who contains the Lich, loving a child whose true nature might be something incompatible with love. Their parental devotion is both touching and terrifying, an act of faith that the innocent surface is the true self. The episodes where the Lich briefly emerges from Sweet Pea, where the dormant evil temporarily reactivates, are among the most tense in the series. They remind us what is at stake, what Sweet Pea's existence holds back, what could return if the containment fails. These moments treat Sweet Pea's goodness as precious precisely because it is precarious, valuable precisely because it could be lost, hopeful precisely because the alternative is visible beneath it. The philosophical question of personal identity that Sweet Pea raises is profound. Is he the same being as the Lich? And if so, how can he be so different? Is he a new being who happens to occupy the Lich's transformed body? And if so, what happened to the Lich? The show uses these questions to explore what makes someone who they are, whether identity persists through radical transformation, whether the self is continuous or can be fundamentally changed without being destroyed. The hope that Sweet Pea represents, the possibility that even the Lich can become something other than what he was, is qualified by the persistent threat that he could revert, that the transformation could reverse, that the goodness could be temporary. This qualified hope is more realistic than unqualified hope would be, acknowledges that change is always uncertain, that improvement is always potentially reversible, that the darkness we contain does not simply disappear when we become better. Sweet Pea models what it looks like to live with your own potential for evil, to be good while knowing that you contain something that is not good. The name Sweet Pea itself is significant, a name that emphasizes innocence and gentleness, that refuses the identity of the Lich, that asserts a new self through new naming. He is not called Reformed Lich or Transformed Lich, or any name that would keep the Lich's identity primary. He is Sweet Pea, his own being, with his own identity that is not merely the Lich's negation, but something positive and new. The naming is an act of hope, an assertion that he is what his new name says rather than what his history would suggest. The visual design of Sweet Pea reinforces his innocence through his childlike appearance, his rounded features, his expressions of genuine emotion and concern. Nothing in how he looks suggests the horror he contains. This disconnect between appearance and content is itself meaningful, suggests that what we contain is not visible on our surfaces, that the most innocent-seeming beings might contain the darkest possibilities. Sweet Pea is a warning about the limits of appearance as evidence of nature. The relationship between Sweet Pea and Finn is particularly poignant because Finn has fought the Lich repeatedly, has experienced his menace directly, knows what exists within the child he now interacts with. Finn's willingness to treat Sweet Pea as Sweet Pea, rather than as the Lich, represents a choice to believe in transformation, to accept the new identity, to not let the past determine the present entirely. This choice is risky and potentially costly, but it is also generous and hopeful. The storylines that focus on Sweet Pea's integration into Ooze society, his acceptance by others, his development as a person, carry weight because we know what he is, what he might become, what lurks beneath his sweetness. Every kindness shown to him is a bet against his nature. Every relationship he forms is potentially a tragedy waiting to happen. Every moment of his happiness is shadowed by the possibility of its ending. This shadow does not make his happiness less real, but makes it more precious. The philosophical question of whether Sweet Pea's goodness is authentic or merely a suppression of his true nature, whether he is genuinely transformed or merely contained, maps onto questions about personal change that everyone faces. Are we truly different when we change, or are we the same people with different behaviors? Does growth replace what we were, or does it merely overlay it? Sweet Pea embodies these questions in dramatic form, makes visible what is usually invisible about the process of becoming better than we were. The threat that the Lich within Sweet Pea could emerge again keeps the character dramatically interesting across multiple seasons, creates ongoing tension that never fully resolves, ensures that his appearances always carry stakes beyond the immediate plot. He is a time bomb in the shape of a child, a catastrophe wearing a smile, a reminder that the show's greatest villain has not been defeated but merely relocated into a new form. The episodes that feature Sweet Pea tend to be among the show's most emotionally complex, balancing horror and tenderness, threat and hope, in ways that require sophisticated tonal control. The writers must make us fear for Sweet Pea, fear Sweet Pea, love Sweet Pea, and feel protective of Sweet Pea simultaneously. This emotional complexity is what makes his character work, what makes him more than just a gimmick or plot device. The arc of Sweet Pea across the series, from his emergence through his integration into Ooh society, through the various challenges to his identity, constitutes one of the show's most sustained meditations on the themes of nature versus nurture, redemption versus containment, hope versus realism. His story is not resolved so much as continued, not concluded so much as left open, acknowledging that some questions cannot be answered within any story's runtime. The audience's relationship to Sweet Pea changes across the series as our understanding of him deepens and as his own character develops. Initial suspicion gives way to affection, gives way to complex feelings that include both love and fear. This emotional journey mirrors what loving someone difficult is actually like, what caring about someone who contains darkness actually involves. Sweet Pea teaches viewers something about love that simpler characters could not teach. The concept of the Lich as entropy given will, as the heat death of the universe given agency and intention, provides a framework for understanding what he represents beyond the immediate narrative. He is not merely a villain with a plan, but a cosmic principle with a face, not merely a threat to characters we love, but a statement about the fundamental structure of reality. The second law of thermodynamics, which says that entropy always increases, that order tends toward disorder, that all systems eventually run down, finds in the Lich its advocate and agent. This reading of the Lich as entropy personified explains his patience, his persistence, his lack of urgency despite his clear intention. Entropy does not hurry. The heat death of the universe will arrive eventually, regardless of what happens in the meantime. The Lich can afford to wait, can afford to fail repeatedly, can afford to be defeated again and again, because time is on his side, because the fundamental direction of reality favors ending over continuation, dissolution over persistence. He represents what will eventually win, and he knows it. The resistance to the Lich, the fight to continue existing, to maintain order, to preserve what exists against what would end it, is therefore a fight against the fundamental nature of things, a rebellion against the direction the universe is heading, a statement that what will eventually happen should not happen now and should be delayed as long as possible. This resistance is heroic precisely because it is ultimately futile, noble precisely because it cannot finally succeed, meaningful precisely because it opposes something that will eventually win anyway. The show's willingness to let the Lich represent something this large, this abstract, this philosophical, demonstrates the ambition that sets Adventure Time apart from other animated series. The Lich is not merely a cartoon villain, but a meditation on the nature of existence, a confrontation with questions that philosophy and theology have wrestled with for millennia. The show trusts its audience to engage with this level of meaning, to find in its colourful adventures something that speaks to the deepest questions human beings ask. The relationship between the Lich's cosmic significance and his immediate threat to characters we care about creates productive tension that keeps him from becoming merely abstract. He is entropy, yes, but he is also the specific being who threatens Finn and Jake and everyone else we love. He is the heat death of the universe. Yes, but he is also the monster in this episode who must be defeated. The show maintains both levels simultaneously, lets him be philosophically significant without losing narrative urgency. The question of whether consciousness like the Lich's could emerge from entropy itself, whether the drive toward ending could become aware and intentional, whether the universe's tendency toward dissolution could develop something like will, is science fiction speculation that the show does not explain but simply presents. The Lich exists as if such emergence were possible, as if entropy could think, as if the void could want. This is perhaps the most frightening thing about him. He suggests that the forces that will eventually end everything might be not blind but purposeful, not mechanical but malevolent. The comfort, if there is comfort, in the Lich's existence as entropy personified is that entropy is impersonal, does not hate us, does not target us, simply is what it is. The Lich takes away this comfort by making entropy personal, by giving it a face that can look at us, by transforming impersonal process into personal antagonist. What was merely sad becomes malevolent. What was merely inevitable becomes hostile. What was merely the way things are becomes the way things want to be. This transformation from impersonal to personal is the Lich's most disturbing achievement. The science behind entropy, the physics that describes the universe's tendency toward disorder, provides grounding for the Lich's cosmic significance. This is not merely mythological evil, but evil that connects to how the universe actually works, evil that has a foundation in scientific description, even as it exceeds that description by having will and intention. The Lich is where science and horror meet, where factual description of the universe's structure becomes the basis for existential terror. The timescale on which entropy operates, the billions of years before the heat death of the universe, seems to make it irrelevant to human concerns. We will be long gone before entropy finishes its work. The Lich collapses this timescale, brings the distant future into the present, makes the eventual ending of everything into an immediate threat. He accelerates entropy, hurries what would otherwise take eons, makes the eventual inevitable into the possibly imminent. The other beings who resist the Lich are, in this reading, fighting not just a villain, but the fundamental direction of reality, opposing not just an enemy, but the arrow of time itself. This gives their resistance cosmic significance that ordinary heroism lacks. They are not just saving their world, they are asserting that ordered existence has value, that the tendency toward disorder should be resisted, that what entropy would dissolve is worth preserving. Their fight is metaphysical as well as physical. The question of why the Lich exists at all, why entropy would develop will, why the universe would produce a being dedicated to its own ending, points toward mysteries that the show does not resolve. Perhaps consciousness tends toward nihilism at cosmic scales. Perhaps the universe contains within it not just the tendency toward disorder, but the desire for disorder. Perhaps the Lich is not an aberration, but an expression of something fundamental, something that would exist in any universe that had developed complexity enough to wish for its own undoing. The relationship between the Lich and Golb, the other cosmic entity in Adventure Time, illuminates what is distinctive about the Lich's particular brand of menace. GOLB represents chaos, discord, the breakdown of pattern into randomness. The Lich represents ending, cessation, the final state after all disorder has completed its work. They are related but different. Golb is the process. The Lich is the result. Golb is the unravelling. The Lich is the silence that follows. Both are terrifying, but in different ways. The visual representation of entropy through the Lich, the way his decayed form and consuming presence make abstract physics visible, is one of the show's aesthetic achievements. Abstract concepts need concrete forms to be dramatically effective, need bodies and faces and voices to become narratively present. The Lich provides these for entropy, makes the abstract concrete, gives audiences something to see and fear and oppose. He is entropy's avatar, its representative in the realm of story. The relationship between the Lich's entropy symbolism and real human anxiety about mortality and extinction gives his character psychological depth that pure fantasy would lack. We fear death. We fear the ending of everything we love. The Lich gives form to these fears, makes them external, allows us to see them and oppose them in the safe space of fiction. He is therapeutic in a strange way, allowing us to process fears that would otherwise remain formless and therefore harder to address. The question of whether the Lich's entropy symbolism is intended by the show's creators or read into it by audiences is less important than whether the reading illuminates. Authorial intention is not the only source of meaning. If reading the Lich's entropy makes him more interesting, more frightening, more philosophically rich, then the reading has value regardless of whether it matches what the writers consciously intended. The Lich exceeds his creation, means more than any individual involved in his creation may have known. The Lich's returns across the series, his refusal to stay defeated, his persistence through apparent destruction, establishes something important about the nature of what he represents. You cannot kill an idea. You cannot permanently defeat a principle. You cannot end something that is itself ending, cannot destroy something that is itself destruction. The Lich keeps coming back because what he represents keeps existing, because the forces he embodies do not disappear when their avatar is temporarily dispersed. His returns are not failures of storytelling, but accurate representations of how certain kinds of threat actually work. Each return finds the Lich in a different form, occupying a different body, using a different strategy, but always recognizably himself beneath the surface variation. He possesses Billy and wears heroism as disguise. He manipulates the citadel of cosmic criminals. He speaks through possessed beings and animated corpses. The forms change, but the essence remains. The intention persists. The drive toward ending continues, regardless of what container it currently occupies. This flexibility of form, combined with consistency of purpose, makes him uniquely difficult to oppose. The show's decision to bring him back repeatedly, rather than defeating him once and moving on, reflects an understanding that some threats are structural rather than incidental. The Lich is not a problem that solving removes from the story. He is a feature of the reality the show depicts, a permanent shadow that the light must continually define itself against. His returns are not repetition, but demonstration, showing again and again that what he represents cannot be eliminated from any world complex enough to contain consciousness and its opposite. The emotional impact on characters who have defeated him before and must face him again deserves attention. Finn's weariness when confronting the Lich for the nth time, the weight of knowing that victory is temporary, the exhaustion of fighting something that will not stay fought, mirrors real human experience of dealing with problems that recur despite our best efforts. Some things in life are like the Lich. You can beat them back, but you cannot beat them permanently, can manage them, but cannot cure them, can resist them, but cannot eliminate them. The escalation of stakes across the Lich's returns keeps his reappearances fresh despite their familiarity. First he threatens U, then he threatens the multiverse. Each return raises what he might accomplish if, unopposed, expands the scope of what his victory would mean, increases the pressure on those who resist him. This escalation is narratively necessary to maintain tension, but also philosophically significant. It suggests that the forces of ending, if not constantly opposed, grow stronger rather than weaker, accumulate rather than diminish. The question of what would finally defeat the Lich, what could end the ending itself, whether any victory over him could be truly permanent, remains open throughout the series. The show does not provide a final answer, because perhaps there is no final answer, because perhaps the Lich cannot be finally defeated any more than death itself can be finally defeated. The best that can be achieved is ongoing resistance, perpetual vigilance, the commitment to fighting him whenever he appears, without the expectation that any single fight will be the last. The meta-narrative function of the Lich returns, their role in structuring the series as a whole, gives the show a recurring touchstone that marks its development and measures how far characters have come. Early encounters with the Lich establish Finn as young and inexperienced. Later, encounters show his growth, his increased capability, his deeper understanding of what he faces. The Lich's returns provide a constant against which change can be measured, a threat that remains the same while everything else develops. The audience's relationship to the Lich's returns evolves across the series from fear to familiarity to something more complex. We learn to expect him, to anticipate his strategies, to recognize the signs of his approach. But this familiarity does not diminish his threat. It deepens our understanding of what his threat means. We know him better with each return, understand more fully what he represents, appreciate more completely why he must be opposed. Knowledge increases dread rather than reducing it. The structure of the Lich's returns, the pattern they create across the series, gives the show a rhythm that other recurring villains do not provide. His appearances are not random, but placed at moments of narrative significance, at turning points where the show needs to remind viewers what the stakes really are. This structural function makes him more than a character. He is a tool the show uses to calibrate its own dramatic weight, to ensure that lightness does not become trivial. The defeats the heroes achieve over the Lich, temporary though they are, provide genuine satisfaction precisely because we know how hard won they are. Each victory against him is a victory against something that will return, against something that represents forces larger than itself, against something that embodies the fundamental threat to everything the heroes love. These victories are meaningful because they are difficult, and because their difficulty is honest about what resistance to such forces actually requires. The moral of the Lich's returns, if there is a moral, is that some fights are ongoing, that some threats require perpetual vigilance, that the price of survival against certain enemies is eternal resistance. This is not a comforting message, but it is an honest one, a message that prepares viewers for a world where problems do not stay solved, where victories must be won again and again, where the forces of destruction do not politely disappear once defeated. The comparison between the Lich's returns and the returns of other recurring villains in other shows illuminates what makes him distinctive. Other villains come back because they are popular, because the show wants to use them again, because their defeats were never meant to be permanent. The Lich comes back because what he represents cannot be permanently defeated, because his returns are thematically necessary, because his persistence is part of what he means. His returns are not commercial, but philosophical. The narrative tension created by knowing the Lich will return, by understanding that any victory is temporary, gives the show a darker undertone than it would otherwise have. Even in episodes where he does not appear, his potential presence shadows the proceedings, reminds viewers that the world they are watching contains something that wants it to end. This undertone is part of what makes Adventure Time more than just another cartoon, what gives it depth and weight that simpler shows lack. The question of how the show will ultimately handle the Lich, whether it will provide some final resolution or leave his threat ongoing, creates anticipation that extends across the entire series. Viewers watch partly to see how this thread will be resolved, whether resolution is even possible, whether the show will find some way to definitively address a threat that has been presented as essentially permanent. This question keeps viewers invested across seasons and years. The craft of making returns feel fresh rather than repetitive is something the show handles with skill. Each time the Lich appears, the circumstances are different, the stakes have evolved, the characters have changed since they last faced him. The threat is the same, but everything around it has shifted, creating new angles on familiar menace, new contexts for eternal danger. This craft prevents the returns from becoming stale while preserving what makes them meaningful. The emotional preparation that viewers develop for Lich episodes, the particular state of mind they enter when they know he will appear, is itself evidence of his effectiveness. We brace ourselves for him in ways we do not brace for other villains. Prepare to encounter something genuinely disturbing, set aside the expectation of comfort that usually accompanies watching a familiar show. The episode where the Lich possesses Billy, wearing the greatest hero of Ooh as a disguise, represents one of the show's most effective uses of dramatic irony, and one of its darkest statements about the relationship between good and evil. Billy is everything the Lich is not: beloved, heroic, a symbol of hope and triumph over darkness. The Lich choosing Billy as his disguise is not merely tactical, but symbolic, a statement that even the greatest good can be corrupted, that even the brightest symbol can be hollowed out and made to serve darkness. The experience of watching Finn interact with Billy, trusting him, following his guidance, while knowing that Billy is already gone and the Lich speaks through his form, creates almost unbearable tension. The audience knows what Finn does not know, sees the trap he is walking into, wants to warn him, but cannot. This dramatic irony is one of the most powerful tools storytelling possesses, and the show uses it here to maximum effect, letting the dread build across scenes as Finn moves closer and closer to disaster. The revelation that Billy has been the Lich all along, that everything he has said and done was manipulation toward the Lich's ends, recontextualizes the entire episode in ways that reward rewatching. Details that seemed innocent become sinister. Advice that seemed helpful becomes manipulation. The comfort of Billy's presence becomes the horror of the Lich's proximity. The show trusts viewers to experience this recontextualization, to feel the full weight of having been deceived alongside Finn. The death of the real Billy, implied by the Lich's possession of his form, is handled with restraint that makes it more powerful. The show does not linger on what happened to Billy, does not show his defeat or his end. It simply presents the Lich wearing his face, and the implication is clear and terrible. Billy is gone, replaced, his legacy now used to serve everything he opposed. This is violation beyond physical harm, desecration of memory and meaning, the corruption of what someone represented. The trauma this experience creates for Finn, the shattering of his trust in appearances, the knowledge that even the greatest hero can be hollowed and worn by the greatest evil, marks a loss of innocence that the show treats seriously. Finn after the Billy revelation is different from Finn before it. He knows something now about how the world works, about what evil is capable of, about the limits of trust and the vulnerability of even the strongest symbols. This knowledge changes him, matures him, darkens his understanding. The symbolism of the Lich-wearing heroism as disguise extends beyond the immediate plot to comment on the nature of evil itself. Evil does not always announce itself. Evil sometimes wears the faces we trust, speaks the words we want to hear, guides us toward destruction while pretending to guide us toward salvation. The Lich, as Billy, is a warning about the forms evil can take, the disguises it can wear, the ways it can manipulate our hope rather than only our fear. The question of whether Billy could have been saved, whether the Lich's possession was reversible, whether some part of Billy persisted inside the monster wearing his form, is one the show does not definitively answer. This ambiguity serves the tragedy, makes Billy's fate more terrible by leaving open the possibility that he was somehow aware of what his body was being used for, that he was present for his own corruption without the ability to stop it. The loss of Billy is the loss of the show's greatest symbol of hope before Finn, the loss of proof that heroes can triumph against darkness, the loss of a figure who represented what was possible when courage and skill and virtue combined. The Lich did not merely kill Billy, he erased what Billy meant, converted his legacy from inspiration to manipulation, turned the memory of heroism into a tool for destruction. This is violation at the level of meaning, not just the level of body. The implications for Finn specifically, who looked up to Billy as a model of what heroism could be, are devastating. His hero is not merely dead, but was used against him, not merely gone, but transformed into an instrument of the very evil Billy had opposed. Finn must rebuild his understanding of heroism from this rubble, must find new foundations for his sense of what he is trying to be, must continue being a hero while knowing that even the greatest hero can be corrupted and used. The visual horror of the Lich emerging from Billy's form, the moment when the disguise is dropped and the truth is revealed, is one of the most impactful images in the series. The familiar face splits to reveal the skull beneath. The beloved figure becomes the terrifying enemy. The symbol of hope becomes the harbinger of extinction. This image encapsulates everything the Lich represents: the corruption of good, the hollowing of meaning, the reduction of everything to the death that underlies it. The aftermath of the Billy revelation, the way the show handles its consequences, demonstrates respect for the weight of what has happened. The show does not move on quickly, does not treat the loss of Billy as a plot point to be processed and forgotten. The loss echoes through subsequent episodes, shapes how characters understand their world, remains present as a wound that does not fully heal. This is how significant loss actually works, and the show honours that reality. The broader implications for Ooh of Billy's death and corruption extend beyond Finn's personal trauma. Billy was a symbol for everyone, a figure who represented the possibility of victory against darkness. His loss is collective, his corruption a blow to collective morale, his fate a warning that no one is safe, that even the best can fall, that the Lich can reach anyone. The community must reckon with this knowledge, must continue fighting despite knowing what fighting can cost. The craftsmanship of the Billy episodes, the way they build toward revelation, the way they use dramatic irony, the way they handle the aftermath, demonstrates Adventure Time at its narrative best. These are not just effective horror episodes, but effective episodes period, using every tool of storytelling to create maximum impact. The Lich inspires the show to reach for more, to attempt things that ordinary episodes do not require, to demonstrate what animation can achieve when it takes its material seriously. The comparison between Billy and other fallen heroes in fiction illuminates what makes his fall distinctive. Other heroes fall through weakness or corruption or choice. Billy falls through the Lich's action, not through any failure of his own, not because he was less than what he seemed, but because even what he was could not protect him. His fall is not a revelation of hidden flaws, but a demonstration of the Lich's power to corrupt even the flawless. This makes his fate more tragic, not less. The memory of Billy that persists after his death and corruption, the way characters remember what he was rather than what he became at the end, shows the show's commitment to honouring what he represented. The Lich used his form but did not erase his meaning. Billy remains a hero in memory even though his body served evil. This distinction between the person and what was done with their remains is important. Preserves what deserves preservation while acknowledging what was lost. The narrative function of the Billy storyline extends beyond its immediate episodes to shape the entire series. Before Billy's fall, certain things seemed possible. After his fall, the world is different, darker, more aware of what can happen to even the best among us. This permanent change to the show's reality demonstrates the weight the writers give to significant events, their commitment to consequences that persist rather than resetting. The artistic achievement of the Billy episodes, their combination of horror and pathos, their balance of menace and mourning, marks them as high points of the series. They demonstrate what Adventure Time can accomplish when it fully commits to difficult material, what the show is capable of when it trusts its audience to handle genuine darkness. The relationship between the Lich and the concept of evil in Adventure Time illuminates what the show is saying about morality, meaning, and the structure of reality itself. The show generally avoids pure evil, preferring complex villains with understandable motivations, tragic antagonists whose opposition emerges from comprehensible circumstances. The Lich is the exception that proves this rule, the one character who is simply evil without mitigation, whose presence throws into relief how much mitigation other villains receive. This exception is philosophically significant because it asserts that pure evil exists, that not everything can be explained or redeemed, that some forces are simply opposed to existence and must be simply opposed in return. This assertion is controversial in an era that prefers to find complexity everywhere, that is suspicious of moral absolutes, that tends to see claims of pure evil as failures of understanding. The Lich challenges this tendency, insists that some things really are just evil, that complexity is not always present. The show's decision to include one character who is unredeemable does not contradict its general preference for complexity, but complements it. The redemption arcs that other villains receive are meaningful precisely because redemption is not universal, because some things cannot be redeemed. If everyone could be redeemed, redemption would be trivial. The Lich's irredeemability gives weight to the redemption of others. establishes that redemption is an achievement rather than an inevitability. The question of what makes the Lich irredeemable, what makes him different from villains who can change, illuminates the nature of moral possibility. Other villains do bad things for reasons, and if the reasons could be addressed, the bad actions might stop. The Lich does not do bad things for reasons in this sense. He is badness itself, his entire existence oriented toward ending, his nature constituted by the evil he represents. There is nothing beneath his evil that could be appealed to, no self beneath the malevolence that could be reached. The existence of such a being in the show's cosmology has implications for how we understand the other characters' choices. When Finn chooses to fight, he is choosing to oppose something genuinely worth opposing. When Marceline struggles with her past, she is distinguishing herself from something that does not struggle. When Ice King is pitied rather than hated, the pity is meaningful because hatred is reserved for something that deserves it. The Lich calibrates the show's moral compass, provides a fixed point against which all other moral positions can be measured. The philosophical tradition that the Lich draws on includes theological concepts of absolute evil, Augustinian notions of evil as privation of good, Manichaean ideas about the fundamental conflict between light and darkness. He is not merely a cartoon villain, but a participant in debates that have occupied human thought for millennia. Understanding him fully requires engaging with these traditions, recognizing him as Adventure Time's contribution to ongoing conversation about the nature of evil. The practical implications of the Lich's existence for the characters who must live in a world that contains him include the necessity of ongoing vigilance, the impossibility of final victory, the requirement of courage without the guarantee of triumph. Living in a world with the Lich means living in a world where evil is real and permanent, where the best that can be achieved is management rather than elimination, where the fight must continue without end. This is darker than most children's shows acknowledge, and perhaps closer to truth than more optimistic visions. The Lich's role in the show's overall moral framework is to provide the fixed point against which all other moral positions are measured. When we ask whether a character is good or evil, we are asking where they fall on a spectrum that has the Lich at one end. When we evaluate the seriousness of a threat, we are comparing it to the threat the Lich represents. When we consider whether someone can be redeemed, we are implicitly acknowledging that redemption has limits by reference to the one who cannot be redeemed. The educational function of the Lich for young viewers includes the introduction of concepts that will serve them throughout their lives, that some things are simply wrong, that evil exists and must be opposed, that moral complexity has limits, that certain forces deserve only resistance and never negotiation. These are hard lessons, but necessary ones, lessons that a world full of nuance and ambiguity sometimes needs to have complemented by clarity about what lies beyond the pale. The comparison between Adventure Time's treatment of evil through the Lich and other shows' treatments of evil illuminates what is distinctive about the show's approach. Many shows avoid pure evil entirely, preferring antagonists whose opposition can be understood and perhaps addressed. Adventure Time includes such antagonists, but also includes one who cannot be understood in any way that would make him less threatening, cannot be addressed in any way that would reduce his menace. This inclusion is a philosophical choice that shapes the show's entire moral universe. The question of whether the Lich represents the show's view of the universe or merely one possibility within it is worth considering. The Lich exists, but so do Finn and Jake, and all the forces of creation and connection. The show does not say the Lich is right about existence being destined for ending. It says he exists, that his perspective is part of the picture, that his threat must be reckoned with. The show's view seems to be that both life and death, both creation and destruction, both meaning and meaninglessness are real, and the choice between them is ongoing. The balance the show maintains between the Lich's darkness and the show's overall warmth is one of its most impressive achievements. The Lich is genuinely threatening, genuinely dark, genuinely frightening, but the show is also genuinely warm, genuinely hopeful, genuinely affirming of life and connection. These two elements coexist, neither cancelling the other, creating a world that is both darker and lighter than either element alone would suggest. This balance is what makes the show feel true to life. The courage the show demonstrates in including a character like the Lich, in trusting its audience to handle genuine darkness, in refusing to soften everything for easy consumption, deserves recognition. It would have been safer to have only complex villains, only antagonists who could be understood and perhaps redeemed. Including one who cannot be understood, who cannot be redeemed, who must simply be opposed, is a choice that risks alienating viewers, but that also enables depths that safer choices cannot reach. The legacy of this choice for future shows, the permission it grants to other creators to include genuine darkness in their work, extends Adventure Time's influence beyond its own narrative. Shows that followed knew that pure evil could be included in children's entertainment because Adventure Time had proven it could work. The Lich opened a door that other shows have walked through, expanded the range of what the medium could accomplish. The Lich's place in the show's mythology, his role as the ultimate evil against which all other evils are measured, gives the show a moral clarity that pure complexity would lack. Viewers know where they stand with the Lich, know that opposing him is right, know that his victory would be bad. This clarity grounds the show's more ambiguous moral explorations, provides a foundation of certainty that supports the uncertainty elsewhere. The necessary existence of something like the Lich in any moral universe that wants to take evil seriously suggests that his presence is not gratuitous but essential. A world without pure evil would be a world where evil was always explicable, always potentially addressable, always ultimately reducible to misunderstanding or circumstance. The Lich proves that this is not the only possibility, that some evil is simply evil and must be treated as such. The question of why the Lich is terrifying, what specifically makes him the most frightening character in Adventure Time, deserves analysis that goes beyond the obvious observations about his power and his goals. His terror comes not from what he can do, but from what he represents, not from his threat to bodies, but from his threat to meaning. He is frightening because he suggests that existence might be pointless, that resistance might be futile, that everything we value might be destined for the void, regardless of what we do. The cosmic scale of his vision, his perspective that sees individual lives as insignificant against the vastness of time and space, introduces a kind of existential vertigo that is distinct from ordinary fear. We can handle threats to our safety. We handle them every day, navigating a world full of dangers that might harm us. What is harder to handle is the threat to our significance, the suggestion that we do not matter, that our struggles and achievements and loves are ultimately meaningless. The Lich speaks to this deeper fear. The indifference he displays, his lack of malice in any personal sense, makes him more frightening rather than less. A villain who hates us at least acknowledges that we matter enough to hate. The Lich does not hate us. He simply wants us to not exist, along with everything else. as part of a project that is not about us at all. We are not his enemies, but merely obstacles, not targets of his rage, but incidental to his purpose. This indifference denies us even the significance of being specifically opposed. The impersonality of his evil, his function as a force rather than a person, removes the possibility of the kinds of responses that usually work against villains. You cannot appeal to his better nature because he has no better nature. You cannot find his weakness because his weakness is not psychological but purely physical. You cannot outsmart him in any final sense because his persistence is not based on strategy but on the nature of what he is. He is beyond the reach of the tools that usually work against antagonists. The visual representation of the Lich, his skeletal form and green fire, taps into primal fears that operate beneath conscious thought. Skulls signal death, decay, the fate that awaits all flesh. Green in this context signals corruption, poison, wrongness. The combination triggers responses that are evolutionary in origin, reactions to threats that our ancestors learned to recognize and flee. The Lich's design reaches past the rational mind to grab the ancient fears that live beneath it. The way he moves, the deliberation of his actions, the weight he seems to carry, creates a sense of inevitability that enhances his menace. He does not hurry because he does not need to hurry. He does not chase because he knows that running only delays, does not prevent. His patience is the patience of something that knows it will win eventually, that treats current resistance as a temporary inconvenience, that regards those who oppose him with something like pity for their futile efforts. The silence he sometimes maintains, saying nothing while his presence dominates, can be more frightening than his speeches. Silence suggests that he has nothing to say to us, that we are not worth addressing, that our existence does not merit the acknowledgement that speech would provide. When he does speak, the silence that preceded and follows his words amplifies their impact, makes them stand out against the void of his usual quiet. The knowledge that he is always potentially present, that any moment of peace might be prelude to his return, creates background anxiety that persists even when he is not on screen. The Lich haunts the show, even in his absence, shadows the happiest moments with the awareness that happiness is temporary, that joy exists in a world where the Lich also exists, that everything good is threatened by something that wants only its end. The fear the Lich inspires is different from ordinary fear because it is not about what might happen to us, but about what might be true about existence. We fear pain and loss and death in ordinary ways. Fear what might happen to our bodies and our loved ones. The Lich inspires fear at a deeper level. Fear about whether anything we do matters, fear about whether existence itself has value, a fear about whether the universe we inhabit is ultimately hostile to everything we care about. This existential fear is harder to face than ordinary fear. The catharsis the show provides through opposition to the Lich is specifically calibrated to address this existential fear. When Finn fights the Lich and wins, however temporarily, the victory is a statement that existence matters, that resistance is worthwhile, that meaning persists despite the forces that threaten it. This catharsis does not solve the problem the Lich represents, but provides relief from it, moments of triumph that make continued existence bearable, even in a world that contains such darkness. The legacy of the Lich in animation history includes his establishment as a standard for how threatening a villain can be in children's entertainment. Future creators who want to include genuine menace in their work can point to the Lich as proof that it can be done, that young audiences can handle real darkness, that not everything needs to be softened for consumption by the young. He has expanded the range of what is possible in the medium. The Lich remains frightening, even to adult viewers who have encountered many fictional villains, because he speaks to fears that do not diminish with age, that may in fact deepen as we become more aware of mortality and the limits of what we can control. Adults know that the universe is vast and indifferent. Know that all things end. Know that the forces of destruction are real, even if they do not take the form of a skeletal figure with burning eyes. The Lich gives form to adult fears as much as to children's fears. The final word on why the Lich is terrifying might be the simplest. He shows us what it would look like if everything we love were to end, not through accident or natural process, but through intention, through will, directed at our annihilation. He makes extinction personal, gives it a face and a voice, allows us to see our potential ending looking back at us. This is the deepest fear made visible, and visibility, while terrifying, is also the precondition for being faced. The function of fear in healthy psychology includes alerting us to threats, motivating us to address dangers, keeping us vigilant against what might harm us. The Lich serves this function at a cosmic scale, alerting us to the threat of meaninglessness, motivating us to fight for what we value, keeping us vigilant against the forces that would end everything. He is frightening, but his frightening serves a purpose, creates energy that can be directed toward affirmation. The question of whether the Lich would be less effective if the show provided more opportunities to defeat him, more victories that felt permanent, more reassurance that good can triumph once and for all, has a clear answer. His effectiveness depends on his permanence, on the sense that he represents something that cannot be finally beaten, on the ongoing nature of the threat he poses. More victories would diminish him, would turn him into just another villain, would lose what makes him distinctive. The viewers who are haunted by the Lich, who remember him long after watching, who find him appearing in their thoughts unbidden, have experienced what effective horror achieves. He has gotten under their skin, has become part of their imaginative furniture, has joined the collection of images and ideas that shape how they understand the world. This is what the best fictional creations accomplish. They do not stay on the screen, but enter the viewer's mind and take up residence. The Lich will continue to haunt those who have encountered him, will continue to represent what he represents, will continue to embody the threat that his existence makes visible. He is not just a character in a show, but a contribution to the human imagination's inventory of fears and threats and warnings. He joins the pantheon of memorable villains, takes his place among the figures who help us understand what evil can look like and what it can mean. The existence of the Lich, in a world that also contains Finn and Jake and Princess Bubblegum, and all the warmth and colour of Ooh, creates a particular kind of universe, one where light and darkness coexist, where joy is possible but always threatened, where love exists in the shadow of annihilation. This is not a universe of simple triumph or simple defeat, but one of ongoing struggle, perpetual tension, the constant necessity of choosing life against the forces that would end it. The Lich makes this struggle visible, gives it a face and a voice, embodies what must be fought. The coexistence of the Lich with the show's warmer elements is not contradiction, but complement. The warmth is warmer because the darkness is dark. The joy is more precious because it is threatened. The love is more meaningful because it exists despite what would destroy it. Without the Lich, Adventure Time would be lighter, but also shallower, would offer comfort, but not the depth that comes from comfort that knows what it must be comforted against. The Lich makes the show matter more by showing what does not matter to him. The choice the show makes to include both extremes, to have episodes of pure whimsy and episodes of genuine horror, to let characters experience joy and also face annihilation, reflects something true about life that simpler shows do not capture. Life contains both. Any honest representation of existence must include both the warmth and the darkness, both the possibility of meaning and the threat of meaninglessness, both the love that connects and the void that consumes. Adventure Time's comprehensiveness is part of its achievement. The Lich's presence changes how we experience the lighter episodes, shadows them with awareness of what else exists in this world, prevents the comfort from becoming complacency. We watch Finn and Jake having fun, and we remember that the Lich exists, that their fun takes place in a world where something wants everything to end. This memory does not ruin the fun but deepens it, makes it more valuable, transforms it from simple entertainment into something like defiance of the darkness. The philosophical position the show takes through this coexistence is something like affirmation, despite full awareness of what must be affirmed against. The show does not deny the darkness. It does not pretend the Lich does not exist or minimize what he represents. It simply insists that life is worth living anyway, that meaning can be found anyway, that joy is possible anyway. This is more honest than optimism that ignores darkness, and more hopeful than pessimism that ignores light. The lessons viewers might take from this coexistence include the recognition that their own lives contain both elements, that darkness does not cancel joy, and joy does not cancel darkness, that the mature response to a complex universe is neither denial of difficulty nor surrender to it, but ongoing engagement with both. The Lich teaches viewers something about what they must face. The rest of the show teaches them that facing it is possible, that life can be lived fully, even in the presence of what threatens it. The balance the show maintains between its dark and light elements is not static, but dynamic, shifting across episodes and seasons, sometimes emphasizing one and sometimes the other, but never losing either entirely. This dynamic balance keeps the show feeling alive, prevents it from becoming either too dark to enjoy or too light to take seriously. The Lich is essential to this balance, providing the weight that keeps the show grounded when it might otherwise float away into pure whimsy. The artistic achievement of holding these elements together, of creating a show that can include both the Lich and the Ice King's tragic comedy, both existential horror and slapstick adventure, both philosophical depth and silly jokes, is remarkable. Lesser shows would have to choose, would have to be either dark or light, either serious or fun. Adventure Time refuses this choice, insists that both are possible, demonstrates through its own existence that a show can be comprehensive in ways that honour the full range of human experience. The creators of Adventure Time understood something important about what entertainment can do. It can help viewers develop the emotional and philosophical resources they need to face difficult realities. The Lich is one contribution to this development, a figure who represents genuine threat and genuine darkness. The warmth of the rest of the show is another contribution, showing that life can be good despite the presence of threat. Together, these elements create something more valuable than either would be alone. The legacy of this approach for animation, and for entertainment more broadly, includes the demonstration that audiences want and can handle complexity, that they do not need to be protected from darkness, that they are capable of engaging with difficult material when it is presented with skill and care. Adventure Time's success proves that the choice between depth and accessibility is a false one, that shows can be both serious and entertaining, both dark and fun. The specific contribution the Lich makes to this achievement is the provision of genuine weight, the assurance that the show takes its own reality seriously, the evidence that not everything is a joke, and not everything can be solved by friendship and determination. He grounds the show, keeps it from floating away into pure whimsy, ensures that the stakes feel real because something real is at stake. Without him, the show would be lighter, but also less significant. The universe Adventure Time creates through the coexistence of the Lich with everything else is a universe that viewers can take seriously because it takes itself seriously, can invest in because investment is warranted, can care about because caring is shown to matter. This is the gift the show gives through its comprehensiveness. A world that rewards engagement, that repays attention, that offers genuine meaning to those who seek it. The question of whether other shows should follow Adventure Time's example in including such darkness alongside such light has no single answer. Not every show needs a Lich. Not every narrative benefits from existential threat. But the option is available now in a way it might not have been before Adventure Time proved it could work. Future creators have more options because Adventure Time expanded what was considered possible. The viewers who have experienced both the Lich and the lighter aspects of Adventure Time carry with them a template for how to hold contradictions, how to contain both darkness and light within a single understanding, how to acknowledge threat without being overwhelmed by it. This template is valuable beyond the show, applicable to the actual complexity of actual existence, where joy and terror coexist just as they do in OO. The show's refusal to resolve the tension between its dark and light elements, to declare one victor over the other, to provide final answers about whether existence is good or bad, is itself a statement. Existence is both. Life contains both. The show mirrors this reality rather than simplifying it, trusts viewers to hold the tension rather than demanding resolution. This trust is respect, and viewers respond to being respected. The Lich's place in this complex universe is as one element among many, as the darkest note in a composition that contains many notes. He does not dominate the show, he punctuates it. He does not determine its meaning, he contributes to it. His presence makes the show more comprehensive, more honest, more capable of addressing the full range of human experience. He is essential but not everything, necessary but not sufficient. The lasting impact of the show's approach on viewers includes the development of a more sophisticated relationship to darkness, one that neither denies it nor is paralyzed by it. Viewers who have spent time in OO with the Lich and with Finn have practiced holding both, have developed the imaginative muscles needed to contain contradiction. This practice is valuable, transferable, applicable to real situations where darkness and light coexist. The question of what it means to live in a world that contains something like the Lich, what stance one should take toward existence when existence is threatened by something that wants only its end, is one the show addresses through action more than argument. The characters do not debate the Lich's philosophy. They oppose him. They fight him. They continue existing despite his desire that they stop. Their response to his nihilism is not refutation, but defiance, not argument, but affirmation, enacted through the simple continuation. of their lives. This response is itself a philosophical position, one that has a long history in human thought. The existentialists argued that meaning is not found but created, that the response to a meaningless universe is not despair but engagement, that we make life meaningful by living it meaningfully rather than discovering meaning that was always there. The characters of Adventure Time, whether they know it or not, are existentialists in this sense, creating meaning through their choices rather than waiting for meaning to be provided. The courage this response requires is not diminished by the fact that it is enacted in a cartoon rather than in real life. Fictional courage can model real courage, can show viewers what it might look like to face existential threat with defiance rather than despair. The characters who oppose the Lich are not guaranteed victory. They face something that may be ultimately unbeatable. They fight anyway. This is what courage looks like, and seeing it can help viewers find it in themselves. The community that forms around opposing the Lich, the way characters come together to face a threat that no individual could face alone, models something about how human beings can respond to existential challenges. We do not face annihilation alone. We face it together, supporting each other, drawing strength from each other, finding in connection the resources that isolation cannot provide. The Lich wants to end everything, but the everything he would end includes the relationships that make resistance possible. The love that the characters share, their care for each other, their willingness to sacrifice for each other, is itself a response to the Lich's nihilism. He says nothing matters. They demonstrate through their actions that things do matter, that people matter to each other, that connection has value even in the face of forces that would dissolve all connection. Their love is not argument against his position, but evidence against it, proof that whatever he says, something matters to them. The hope the show offers is not naive hope that good will certainly triumph, not optimistic hope that everything will work out, but something more like the hope of continuing to try, despite uncertainty about outcomes. The characters do not know they will win. They may never win in any final sense. They hope anyway, act anyway, affirm anyway. This is hope for adults. Hope that does not require guarantees. Hope that persists in the face of genuine uncertainty about whether persistence will be rewarded. The model of resistance the show provides is one that acknowledges the reality of the threat, takes seriously what is being resisted, does not minimize the darkness in order to make the light seem brighter. The Lich is genuinely dangerous. He genuinely represents something terrible. The resistance to him is meaningful because what is being resisted is real. This realism about darkness makes the light more credible, makes the hope more honest, makes the affirmation more authentic. The viewers who take from the show the lesson that resistance is possible, that meaning can be found or made, that life is worth living, even in the presence of what threatens it, have learned something valuable. They have seen characters face what the Lich represents and continue. They have watched affirmation enacted against negation. They have witnessed hope maintained against despair. These are not small lessons, not trivial takeaways from mere entertainment. They are resources for living that the show provides alongside its entertainment. The question of whether the show's approach to the Lich and to darkness generally is appropriate for children, whether young viewers should be exposed to such genuine menace, has a complex answer. Children face darkness in their own lives, face fears they may not be able to articulate, encounter the reality of death and loss and threat. Providing them with fictional frameworks for understanding these realities is not harmful but helpful, not traumatizing but preparing. The Lich is safer to encounter first on screen than to encounter only in the unprocessed experiences of real life. The catharsis the show provides through its treatment of the Lich, the release of tension through safely experienced fear, is psychologically valuable. Viewers can experience the terror he inspires, and then experience the relief of his defeat, can feel the weight of his threat, and then feel the lightness of its temporary lifting. This cycle of tension and release is not merely entertaining, but therapeutic, helping viewers process fears they might otherwise have to carry unprocessed. The model the show provides for talking about darkness, for acknowledging that scary things exist without being overwhelmed by them, is valuable for viewers who may need such models. Not everyone has adults in their lives who can help them process fear. Not everyone has safe spaces to explore what frightens them. The show provides such a space, offers such help, demonstrates that darkness can be faced and spoken about and survived. The integration of the Lich into a show that is also often silly and light demonstrates that darkness need not dominate, that fear need not be the only note, that a comprehensive engagement with existence includes joy as well as terror. Viewers learn not just that the Lich exists, but that his existence does not prevent Finn and Jake from having fun, does not stop the characters from forming relationships, does not make life not worth living. This is perhaps the most important lesson, that darkness coexists with light and does not cancel it. The practical wisdom the show offers through its treatment of the Lich includes the recognition that some things must simply be opposed, that not everything can be negotiated with or understood into harmlessness. This is wisdom that complements the show's more frequent lessons about understanding and empathy. Both wisdoms are necessary. Sometimes understanding is the answer. Sometimes opposition is the answer. Knowing which is part of what maturity requires. The way the show models recovery from Lich encounters, the way characters continue with their lives after facing him, demonstrates resilience without minimizing what was faced. The characters do not pretend the encounter did not happen. They are affected by it, changed by it, carry it with them. But they continue. They do not let the encounter be the end of their stories. This modelling of resilience is valuable for viewers who face their own darknesses and need to see that continuation is possible. The final gift the show offers through its treatment of the Lich and through its entire approach to darkness and light is permission. Permission to acknowledge that life is hard. Permission to face what is frightening. Permission to continue anyway. This permission is not small. Many people need permission to feel what they feel, to fear what they fear, to persist despite fear. The show provides this permission through example, through characters who feel and fear and persist. The accumulated wisdom of the show's treatment of the Lich, gathered across seasons and episodes and returns, adds up to something like a philosophy of how to live in a world that contains genuine threat. Acknowledge the threat. Do not minimize it. Do not pretend it does not exist. But also do not surrender to it. Do not let it determine everything. Do not give it more power than it already has. This philosophy is practical, useful, applicable beyond the specific context of the show. Sleep approaches as this consideration of the Lich draws to its end. The night deepens around whoever is listening, the darkness gathering as it does every night, the world growing quiet in the hours when most are unconscious. The Lich would not distinguish between sleep and the ending he desires, would see in sleep only a preview of the cessation he wants to make permanent. But sleep is not death, and the darkness of night is not the void he represents. We will wake tomorrow, and the waking will be its own small victory against the forces that would have us not wake. The Lich exists in the imagination now, for anyone who has encountered him. He has taken his place among the figures that populate our inner worlds, the images that come unbidden in quiet moments, the ideas that shape how we understand what we face. He is there, in the space where fears live, where the mind holds its collection of terrors. He will be there tomorrow and the day after, not because we choose to keep him, but because certain encounters do not leave us unchanged. He has gotten in, and he will stay, but so have the others. Finn is there too, with his courage and his determination, his willingness to face what frightens him. Jake is there, with his loyalty and his humour, his capacity to remain himself, even in the presence of what threatens selfhood. The warmth of Ooh is there, the colour and the strangeness, the proof that existence can be good, that worlds can be worth living in, that meaning can be found or made. The Lich shares imaginative space with everything that opposes him, and the opposition is not obviously losing. The darkness outside as night deepens is not the Lich's darkness, not the void he represents, not the ending he desires. It is merely the absence of sun, the rotation of the earth, the natural cycle that will bring light again in a few hours. This darkness is not enemy, but interval, not threat, but rest, not ending, but pause. Sleep in this darkness is not surrender, but recovery, not defeat, but preparation for another day of existence, another day of affirming what the Lich would negate. The terror the Lich inspires can be held, can be contained, can be acknowledged without being overwhelmed by. He is real in the sense that fictional characters are real, present in the sense that powerful ideas are present, threatening in the sense that representations of threat threaten. But he is also contained by the boundaries of the fiction, limited by the nature of his existence as a character in a show, unable to reach beyond the screen into the world where viewers live their actual lives. The wisdom the show offers about the Lich is that he must be faced, but can be faced, that what he represents is real, but not all that is real, that the darkness he embodies exists, but so does the light that opposes it. This wisdom does not solve the problem he poses, but provides a stance from which to address it, a way of holding the terror that neither denies it nor surrenders to it. The wisdom is practical rather than theoretical, useful for living rather than merely interesting for thinking. The final thought about the Lich as sleep approaches might be this: he exists to be opposed. His function in the show and in the imagination of anyone who has watched the show is to provide something worth fighting against, to give shape to what must be resisted, to make visible the darkness that exists whether or not it has a face. Opposing him is not futile, but essential, not hopeless, but exactly what hope requires. He gives us something to hope against, and in doing so, he makes hope possible. The Lich will be there tomorrow, in the imagination, in the memory of his voice and his form and his terrible patience. He will be there as a reminder of what exists, what threatens, what must be faced. But he will be there alongside everything that opposes him, alongside the courage and the connection and the affirmation that the show also provides. He is not alone in the imagination, and the company he keeps includes everything that makes his presence bearable. The night is not his dominion, despite his affinity for darkness. The night belongs to rest and dreams, and the quiet preparation for another day. He would have the night be permanent, would have darkness never lift, would have sleep never end in waking. But the night has its own logic that his desires cannot override, its own rhythm that continues regardless of what he wants. Night will give way to day, as it always has, as it always will, until something changes that no fictional villain can accomplish. The viewers settling into sleep now, if they are settling into sleep, carry the Lich with them into whatever dreams may come. They also carry Finn and Jake and the land of Oo, the warmth and the colour and the strangeness. They carry a whole world in their imaginations, a world that contains both the darkest villain and the brightest heroes, both the threat of annihilation and the persistence of life. This is a full world, a comprehensive world, a world worth carrying. Sleep now, knowing what exists in the imaginations that have encountered the Lich, knowing what he represents and what opposes him, knowing that the darkness outside is not his darkness, and the sleep ahead is not his victory. The world will continue through the night, will turn toward the sun, will deliver morning to those who sleep through the dark hours. The Lich would prevent this continuation if he could. He cannot. His power has limits that existence itself enforces. Sleep is safe, and morning will come, and life will continue to do what life does: persist, connect, affirm, resist. Rest now in this persistence, in this connection, in this affirmation, in this resistance. The Lich is explained, as much as he can be explained, as much as pure evil can be made comprehensible through analysis and reflection. What remains after explanation is the experience of having encountered him, the memory of what he represents, the resources developed through thinking about what he means. These resources are real, even if he is fictional, useful even for facing threats that do not have his face and voice. He has taught something through his terribleness, and the teaching persists after the analysis ends. Sleep well. The Lich does not sleep, does not rest, does not pause in his eternal project of ending. But you are not the Lich. You are among those who would be ended, among those who sleep and wake and live. Your sleep is part of your living, necessary for it, a nightly affirmation that continuation requires rest as well as effort. The Lich would not understand this, would see in sleep only weakness, only a preview of the cessation he desires. He is wrong. Sleep is strength gathered, energy restored, life preparing to continue. Sleep is not surrender, but strategy. The night holds you now, if you have listened this far into the darkness. It holds the Lich too, in the imagination, in the space where fears live, but the night holds everything, light and dark, the Lich and all who oppose him, the terror and the courage. The night is large enough for all of it, makes no distinctions, offers rest to whoever seeks it. In this democracy of darkness, you are no more endangered than you were in the light. The Lich cannot reach you here, in the real world, in the actual night that has nothing to do with his fictional darkness. The Lich is explained. Sleep awaits, morning will come. Life continues. These simple facts are the show's final answer to everything the Lich represents. The evidence that his project fails, the proof that existence persists despite his desire that it end. You are part of this persistence, part of this continuation, part of the ongoing proof that the Lich cannot win as long as anything remains. Your sleep tonight and your waking tomorrow are small but real contributions to the defeat of what he represents. The analysis is complete, but the Lich remains, as he will always remain, in the imagination, in the show that contains him, in the memory of anyone who has encountered him. He is part of the landscape now, part of the furniture of the mind that has made room for him. He will be there in dark moments, when fear is present, when the void seems close. And alongside him, will be everything that opposes him, ready to be remembered, ready to provide resources for resistance. Sleep well.